My name is Hannah. I'm the Community Media Training Organisation's Student Services and Compliance Officer. I'm also on the board of Technorama, and I'll be on hand to assist in asking your questions to our wonderful panel for this evening, and also to have a good chat with in general. Before we start our webinar tonight, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are recording this webinar, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. Tonight, we are looking at questions that are tough, we are looking at questions that are difficult, and then we're looking at things that are downright obscure. We have our Technorama dream team here tonight to answer all of your technical queries and questions. So to start with, we have the wonderful Richard Fleming from Radio Support Services. We have Cameron Paine from 3RRR. We have Stephen Wilkinson from Hope 103.2. And of course, we have our El Capitan, John Maizels from Technorama. If they could pop up on the video, that would be fabulous.
Hi.
Yeah,
hello,
there
everybody.
they are.
Don't know whether we can live up to that intro.
No. No, you might have noticed my little graphic thing there, which is a new version motorised scooter that I want to get, which is sort of something that's exciting me.
We didn't actually get to see that while it was muted.
Oh, didn't you?
No.
Oh, right,
So
okay. Yeah.
you might have to hold up a picture later. Hannah, thank you very much for that. And Hannah will be in the background. So Hannah will be monitoring the chat for us and monitoring the Q&A, because the rest of us are going to be riffing away on stuff that interests us if you're not asking us about stuff that interests you. But let's start by what's everybody been doing during lockdown. Richard, what's been keeping you busy?
I've been downsizing. We're moving. Radio Support Services coming to the end of life. We've been clearing out the house. We're moving to a retirement village. So there's been an awful lot of gear, stuff that hoarders hoard. John, you'd be surprised at that.
Can't even imagine how that works.
Pieces of 6 inches of wire or jumper wire that one might use one day. All gone to our local recycling area.
Okay.
And a couple of little projects we're doing. 2SER got hit by lightning back in March, and it's taken an awful long time to organise the replacement antenna and feeder cable. So that project's ongoing. We've had other little odds and sods like WOW FM has been continuing on, and 2SSR Sutherland Shire is the latest little project rattling along.
All right, so we'll come back and talk about that, particularly about what you do when your station gets hit by lightning, which is not an uncommon occurrence.
No.
Stephen, over at Hope FM, what's been the go there?
We've been doing a lot of work from home, so helping a lot of people to be able to do that. That's sort of been ongoing. People are slowly coming back into the building as far as office people, but the majority have still been working from home. So that takes a bit to support as we continue on. But in the process, we've been introducing Microsoft Teams, which just allows people to be able to communicate better and share files in the cloud.
So you've moved, as a result of the COVID experience, you've moved to a shared file infrastructure, shared file way of doing things.
Yeah, because we were using it just mainly as a chat sort of function, but it's actually improved, so it's a bit more like Zoom as far as the video conferencing side of it. It integrates into all your Outlook calendar and all that sort of thing. So, and just to be able to, for people to be able to access files easily, it's having a lot of it replicated in the cloud makes it a lot easier to share.
Sure. Okay, Cameron, what's happening at RRR in Melbourne?
Much the same as Stephen. How do you take a radio station that is a bunch of collaborators who turn up every day and spend time together in a building and make that function happen with people not physically present. And that's been a bit of a journey. Cbla has never really experimented with remote working. The IT team are familiar with remote working tools, but we've had to onboard the 26 staff and 90 or so broadcasters. And as I was saying to John earlier, while we were off air, that about half of our programs are being presented not from within the building, and about time-wise, about 50% of that programming is being live presented.
And have you also gone to a shared document paradigm to facilitate that, or did you already have that in place?
We've been ham-fistedly using the Google equivalent to the Microsoft tools that Stephen was just talking about. And so I guess, if anything, this exercise has made us aware at just how ham-fistedly we have been using them, which has been great because, as I've quipped many, many times, if we went to a station manager and said, we want to throw everyone out of the building so we can test what systems do and don't work, you guys would be able to hear the laughing all around the country. But seizing the opportunity that's been presented by the pandemic and the different restrictions that have been imposed has enabled us to explore stuff that we wouldn't under any other circumstances have attempted.
Okay, excellent. All right, and
John, I missed my cue.
John.
We had this carefully rehearsed. Segue here.
Yeah.
John, please tell us what you've been doing during the pandemic.
Oh, well, I've been doing almost not radio apart from Technorama. My big thing was at the end of July, I was leading the technology team for the World Science Fiction Convention, which was supposed to be coming out of Wellington, New Zealand. We were expecting something like 2,500 or 3,000 warm bodies to be turning up from all over the world for the convention, something that was 10 years in the planning. And in March, we made the decision to virtualize it. What's interesting is that a very large amount of the experience and what I ended up putting in place for the project was informed by my work in broadcasting, both radio and television, but a huge amount of outside broadcast experience that came into how do you manage a convention when people aren't in the building. Nobody is in the same place anymore. And when you consider the size of this was a convention that in fact did deliver about 20 parallel streams of programming. We used Discord, both for a lot of our communication and teaming, but also as a way of creating a social environment in parallel with the 30 Zoom instances that we had set up to manage the process. We did a number of main tent events, so there was the award ceremony and opening and closing and everything else. The award ceremony ended up being the only thing that happened live. And eventually that was done out of a team in the States, and I handed that mission over a couple of days out. But we set up a complete virtualized broadcast intercom system in the cloud in order to enable the communication. And I was managing a team of about 30 people. Eventually we had about 2,000 attendees for the convention. Nobody was in the same place. So, you know, it's all those broadcasting skills that you think, what could I ever do with that if I wasn't actually broadcasting? Bang, there it was. So it's been a very exciting time. That all came to a conclusion in August, and I've spent the rest of the time fixing things. And I'll talk about some toys and stuff as we go. Okay, so that's what we've been doing. Well, wondering what you've been doing and what questions would you want to ask a team of people? And what we've got here is 4 people who are or have been chief engineers of radio stations. We've built stations, we've put transmitters together, we've fixed IT systems. All 4 of us, well, we were having a great riff last night. And if you don't ask us any questions, we're going to talk about what interests us.
You're just going to talk.
Or we'll just talk, and sort of, I don't know, sometime after we've been going for an hour, we'll duck out. So ask the questions, pop them in the question box. If we don't see it straight away, Hannah will pop in and say, "Oh, you haven't been watching." It's probably a little late to send them by email, but you can do that as well. That was Chumps at technorama.org.au. Look, we do, and the best question of the night is going to get a free pass to the Cbla convention, and that is worth $70. So the Cbla conference this year at the end of October, it's worth $70, although if you go to the Technorama website, you can see how to get a membership for the full thing for only $35. So there's a special deal that they've offered friends and members of Technorama. But we're going to give somebody a freebie. All you've got to do is ask the best question of the night. Now, you're going to have to beat Miss M. So I'll lead with a question that we have had. And this is an interesting one, and it's a perennial one. And you all will have been worried about how you manage your teams. When the station tech doesn't live close to the station, like it's all very well when the station tech is close by, but when the station tech doesn't live close to the station, what do you do about ensuring that people have access to quick technical support and you're not off air for a couple of hours? Stephen, I'm going to start with you because I know you live close to your station. Some of your staff don't live so close, but you're also managing the tech for a station that's interstate, indeed Brisbane, where you're not allowed to travel. So how have you tackled, and how would you think should be tackled, the process of getting good support?
Well, to start with, having a lot of remote access is a big help. But as we know, there's always that little thing of turning something on and off and on with the physical button that you sometimes can't do remotely. So yes, it makes it difficult. What I have done in the past is that if there's a volunteer or a on-air person that has a bit of a technical bent, that you can talk through what to do if there is a particular issue. Also, in engaging someone locally, whether it's a contractor, to go and push a button. But as we've talked previously, documentation and flow charts and that sort of thing is very important to be able to point somebody in the direction of how to fix something or to repatch something, or that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of redundancy and backup in your setup is important as well.
Richard, you won't have been doing so much of that, but
actually, I have. Yeah,
really?
I have
okay.
lots and lots of remote access with WOW FM, which is based in St Mary's near Penrith, and I live on the Upper North Shore, so that's not the sort of travel that I like doing to go out and push a button. So I've been very reliant on the technical manager out there who's on the board. And he's the single point of contact. So, dear Joe Borg has quite often been, ordered out to the station. He lives in Blacktown to push the proverbial button, and the thing comes
not
back
too
on.
Far away.
No, he's not too far. It's 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Yeah. So, and he's done extraordinarily well at doing that. He's Maltese. We have had our language problems, which has been quite interesting. But that's how we've managed it, and the same thing applies with other work at 2SER. We've been doing that remotely as well.
So in this case, you've set up the tools to be able to do the work from wherever you are. Yeah, what happens if you're not available?
Well, the SER thing is that's now basically run by young Lachlan Cole, who a lot of members met, and he's also now in the process of taking over WOW FM as the permanent contractor. But really, I have sat on the Danube in a river cruise ship, and I've logged into WOW FM, That's not really a very good thing to do,
I bet that
Especially-
went down well with your
Well,
family.
it went down extraordinarily well with Barbara sitting in the cabin at the time, yeah. But the problem got fixed.
Cameron, you've got largely, I think, like a formal paid team working for you. Do you have volunteers as well? And how do you manage ensuring that you've always got coverage for everything that could possibly happen?
I guess we've canvassed all of those things. So documentation, training, and redundancy. Pardon me. So Cbla is blessed at being a larger station, so we have pretty much 2 of everything. In some instances, we've got 3, 4, or 5 of everything. And our volunteer broadcasters are aware of the boundary lines in which they should heal themselves, and most of them are trained to do so. And then there's a core of staff who are available, not quite on a roster, but 24/7. And those people have been empowered with documentation to do pretty much anything. I mean, I can't remember, other than what in the Cbla community we refer to as the flood, when Cbla has been compromised broadcast-wise in the last 15 years. So, but in saying all of that, we're not really speaking to the smaller stations who perhaps don't have 2 studios, don't have 2 microwave links, don't have a terrestrial link to back up their microwave link. And I think the key there, though, is if you can't have the redundancy, you must have the documentation and training so that other people in the station community are empowered to be able to take diagnostic steps, report those things back to you, and you can trust that when you say, turn that key and push that button, that's all they will do.
Okay. I watched a YouTube video a little while back about a guy who landed a plane when the pilot died. Now, this was like a twin turbo prop, and he did have some experience flying, but not on one of those. And he was talked through by ground control. He did, in fact, manage to land the plane and survive with a pretty difficult when the pilot had a heart attack, literally, next to him and just died almost immediately after takeoff. What is the worst thing that can happen to somebody in the studio, and how do you help manage people who are in the studio who might otherwise not have a lot of technical chops? Is there something that you've found works as preparation?
If I can take a bite at that, but it's going to be a roll eyes bite, which comes back to the redundancy, is that build systems that are redundant. I think most of us have got pairs of playout devices in our studios, 2 turntables, 2 CD players, hopefully 2 computers. And if you've got a console that enables all of those things to be routed simultaneously, then that's the training thing, is don't panic, take a deep breath. There's a microphone on the other side of the desk. Like those very simple things can maintain broadcasting continuity. Within my own station, broadcasters are trained to make sure that there is sufficient material going to air from the studio that they're in so that they can comfortably move their operation to an adjacent studio. And there's no magic at our place. Push buttons, switch studios to air and switch studios off air. Multiple studios can be on air at the same time. We use that creatively, but in some critical device in my studio has failed scenario, our broadcasters are trained to move to the room next door.
Okay. So Richard and Stephen, is that the same sort of thing that you'd be doing?
Very much so. And 2SER, for instance, they have a remote studio at Macquarie University. So we developed some software to allow them to put themselves to air without any intervention in the city. Now, the Macquarie studio has been used a lot during COVID because it's a remote resource. away from the city. People didn't have to travel. They could go to a studio that was much closer to them. But the other thing we've always found very handy is cameras in the studio. With notification that there are cameras in the studio, but you can always guide an operator across the console and say, no, the next button up, push that one, and you're right, you're on the air.
If you can see what they're doing. Stephen, same sort of thing?
Yeah, same sort of thing. I mean, if everything fails, the last thing that will kick in is the emergency program player. We have one of those at the station as well as another one at the transmitter site. But in the studio, if for some reason, because we're playing out of our automation system is 99% of the time. So if that, for whatever reason, fails, and it's very unusual for that to fail these days, they've got an internet machine where they can play files directly from that to air. Or we also we still have CD players in this on-air studio, and they can we have normal programming burnt onto the CD to for the on-air guys to play that and talk in between the songs and that sort of thing, which should be updated every 6 to 12 months. But if for whatever reason that's the desk that's gone, well then yes, they can broadcast from another studio.
So there's actually a couple of really good tips there. Always have another studio ready to go. Always have material in a different form ready to go. The one that I actually like, and I have used this a lot because I have no visual memory. So if I'm not looking at something, I probably can't remember what it looks like. And I have done remote support a number of times by having people just quickly pulling up a Skype call or a Zoom call or something and pointing the camera so that I can guide them through, okay, that knob next to the left one, turn that. And that is a really, really good technique.
Absolutely, and that's what I've used with WOW FM. Joe goes in there and does a camera call, and that's it.
I mean, we're very fortunate with having digital studios that you can remote in and look at the state of the desk. And, if for some reason they say they can't go to air, you can see why you haven't got your microphone assigned correctly for whatever reason, and that can be remotely controlled.
But there will come a point at which your internet access to the studio fails and you can't just connect in from the outside. So you've got somebody who's on air, but you can't talk.
Well, we do have 3 internet connections. So.
You have 3 internet connections.
I mean,
are we hearing that the critical thing? So I've heard the word documentation come up any number of times, and then there is the break glass in case of emergency, or the rip top off the envelope instructions. To what extent is that prevalent in stations?
Well, I think what Stephen's talking about there, sorry, Cameron, having multiple paths into your radio station for remote access is mission critical, because a number of times when you're dealing with 2 universities such as 2 SERs, Macquarie and UTS, the number of times either one of those IT departments decides to do a reset and blow your internet connection away, but then having a private ADSL in the background, which is running other stuff, still allows you into your broadcast network. So that's mission critical. Okay,
so think about having a second path. Cameron, were you about to say something?
I was only going to say that's in a fairly narrow domain. That's the redundancy that we spoke of before. That the key to continuity is to have redundant systems. It occurred to me listening to Stephen too that, and this might have resonance with our audience, that many of the things that each of us just talked about is largely informed by the approach our stations take to broadcasting. So my own station is 100% live presented. We don't use automation in the studios, whereas Richard and Stephen were alluding to a greater degree of automation in the studios. And so that means they are dealing with a completely different set, or maybe not completely different set, but a different set of failure modes, and therefore are bringing a different set of solutions to the table. That said, Cbla has 4 discrete internet connections, and that's that's not just physical connectivity, it's for discrete commercial arrangements, so that
So you've like got an Optus path and a Telstra path, or a, some equivalent of that.
If the routing goes tits up and tits up is a technical term, people.
Yes, yes.
If the routing goes tits up within the Telstra network, then we have other networks. But also if a business dispute arises and the provider elects to sever a service as a way of resolving the business dispute, we've got redundancy there as well.
Not necessarily something you would expect to have happen, but it's a contingency for which you can plan.
Absolutely, and
absolutely,
key there is planning. And my suspicion is that routing problems inside a provider's network are more likely to compromise your own connectivity. And Richard's got a special case where the provider is the university, but he was still alluding to routing problems occurring inside that provider's network.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I imagine working inside a corporate environment is much more like, and a university is probably a classic case of that, much more difficult than if you're operating inside the network of a sub-metro where you can make your own rules instead of having to abide by somebody else's.
Absolutely. I mean, within a university environment, you either have a subnet all of your own, which they don't want to know about until such time as they reset the router. That you're part of, and it normally happens on a Sunday when you are running automation or novices are on or whatever.
Doesn't mean that you have to have major fibre connections. Yes, we have 2 major fibre connections, but if someone has a NBN connection or even an ADSL and a 4G backup, that at least gives you some security.
Yeah, and then you just do a cross migration across the 2 networks. Yeah.
Well, in fact, that's becoming very, very common now, where all the major providers can give you, for some amount of money, or maybe included even on the basic charge, a piece of hardware, a router that has built into it a SIM slot. And they will say, here are the 2 services, and if the internet goes away, the SIM will pick up automatically.
Yes, they're saying if the NBN goes away, like Optus and Telstra will provide you with a router with a SIM connection. Slot.
Indeed, I have that here, but not full time. But on the occasions when the hybrid fibre coax goes away, I have the 4G dongle, and I just plug that into, physically go and plug it into a port on the router, and the router just takes over using that service rather than the street.
Telstra offer an interesting service, quite apart from having smarter routers that can decide which network is active and route the data. That we use a Telstra product that I think they market as their managed media contribution service, and that's useful for metro stations because it is immune to contention at the cell tower. So Telstra reserve some capacity on their cell towers for a fairly narrow range of protocols. So no, you can't be updating your Facebook status over this mechanism. But if you're sending aptX stream back to your station over this, then you are sending that over segregated networking, which means that if you're at the footy match doing an OB and there's 10,000 telephones there, that your 4G redundant connection back to the station is immune to the challenges of all of those phones trying to connect to the cellular network.
Or at least more protected.
More protected, yes.
I wouldn't never. I mean, is it really immune? How robust do you think it is?
Oh, it's fantastic, John. We did an OB with 28,000 people in the Treasury Gardens in January of this year, and it was our sole link. We could not get a terrestrial link at the site where the broadcast tent was set up, and we did a dry run the year before, so no one was willing to toss the coin and see if it would work, but we did a dry run at the same festival the year before and recorded it, analysed that recording, absolutely happy with the result. And so program director this year said, yep, I'm comfortable that we've explored the options. Now, our station practice, is to have a continuity announcer in the studio while an outside broadcast is going on, and that person was armed with the same material that was being presented live. They wouldn't have had the interview content, obviously, but had the link dropped out, the show would have run to its conclusion without the listeners really being aware of it. And it's not particularly expensive. I'd encourage stations that do metro broadcasting that have linking problems to explore it. It's certainly something that Telstra, you won't see ads on the tally for it, but it is a mainstream product. And
very good for broadcasters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, exclusively, that's the service that they provide for. I think that this is their attempt at, as ISDN circuits have been slowly rendered inoperable by the inexorable advance of the NBN, Telstra's lost a very lucrative line of business, and this is perhaps one way that they're attempting to maintain relationships with the broadcasting industry.
Okay. So, and there's a good tip. If you want to know how to do that, I know that Cameron is not plugged into Q&A, but if you want to explore that further, that's a good topic to raise on Q&A. And anything that we discuss here on this session, just come up and go, look, I missed that. Can you give me some more information? We'll eventually get to it. Don't forget that you can drop in right now and ask some questions. And yep, we've had a few come in. Nice comment about Discord from Adam. Yep, thank you. I don't think Cbla will be using Discord, at least I don't even know, but it's a really, really useful tool to maintain back channel communications, although I wouldn't suggest you use it as an intercom, but it's freebie and it's really great for doing diagnostic chats. And we did a lot of piling, the equivalent of piling people into a room to solve a problem and then letting everybody go off and work on stuff. Discord is really good for something like that when you've set that up. Barry asked the question, and this is not in line. This is not a formal question, so it's not in line for the freebie. But he did say, "Is the Telstra Metro deal expensive?"
I'll round that out by saying it was cheaper for us than the 6 ISDN services that it replaced.
And you probably better quality.
You pay a flat rate for the data. It's around $10 a gigabyte, which is what you pay on any kind of pay-as-you-go 4G SIM data plan. And there's a maintenance cost. I can't remember. I'm going to say it's $37 a month, but I'm pretty bad at that sort of stuff. So hit me up. I can give you the details. As to whether your station thinks that's expensive or not, I'll leave that for the receivers of this information to decide.
It would depend on the bit rate, but a gigabyte is a lot of data. You could do a pretty substantial outside broadcast and stay up the whole day for a gigabyte. So it's $10 for a link compared to, I don't know, what did the Telstra program lines, it used to be something like $2,500 for a day of a stereo pair.
I think the way we looked at it was that the maintenance cost halved. So the per monthly cost for an ISDN service was about twice what this was.
Yeah.
But that the data rate was 3 or 4 times higher than the ISDN data rate. So for us, it was a business no-brainer. It's not a service, though, that you can turn on and off like a tap. So you've got to commit to a SIM and 12 months, 2 years. I can't remember what the contractual obligations are, but it's not something that you would consider. And the modem, the modem/router that they use, it's excellent. It's got an external coaxial connected antenna, so you can extend the antenna, put it outdoors if you're constrained to indoors. But it's not the cheapest modem router appliance.
Do you purchase that?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. They give you 2 options. One's a Mickey Mouse one. You wouldn't consider it for broadcast use. and the other one, which is the Sierra Wireless, can have 2 SIMs, diversity antennas, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And it's proven for us to be rock solid. The remote broadcasting we've been doing during the pandemic, it's been the B path, and it has run 24/7 since April. Occasionally I look at the Merlin to ask it what the error rates are. The error rates on both the fibre connection and the 4G connection are negligible.
Are we talking about hundreds, thousands for the router?
No, tens. Oh, dollars. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry. I thought we were talking error rates. My recollection was about $1,800.
Okay, so not cheap, but if you're relying on it as your primary device, then an investment. Sort of up there with the tie line, sort of price. Okay.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Stephen,
Yeah,
like what?
Sorry, I was just going to ask. Is that Cameron? I know that Telstra have a thing called Telstra lanes. Is that a version of that?
It's the same. It's badged differently. Lane, Stephen, is for emergency services network. So there is a caveat applies here. If a natural disaster or a fire happens next to your OB, the bandwidth that was otherwise allocated to you as a media organisation is available to the emergency services, first responders. And so you would need to factor that possibility into your risk plan for an OB if you were going to use this technology. So as I understand it, Stephen, to answer your question, Lanes is the product that they offer for the emergency services. And the MMC is the same thing, but specifically targeted at the media industry.
So just before we move on, there is a place for organisations such as community broadcasters generally, when there are also natural disasters. So thinking of the role that we all played during bushfires, for example. Cameron, do you have any knowledge of how Telstra might manage the bandwidth so that the broadcasters and the emergency services still keep going, maybe at the expense of Facebook traffic or hello calls on 3G?
I don't, but in the fine print in the contract, they make it quite clear that first responders get first dibs at the bandwidth.
Okay.
And I think we could all agree that community broadcasting is very important in situations like that, but we'd be taking the piss if we classified ourselves as first responders.
We'd be second responders, and important part of the service, certainly. All right, let's move on. The challenges of shifting to full remote operation. I mean, what sort of technologies have you been employing with your broadcasters from home? How well have they worked? Start with Stephen.
So for at least 3 months of the pandemic, we separated our breakfast duo, and so one of the guys actually broadcast from home. I didn't want to give him a tie line because at that stage we didn't know whether there'd be a full lockdown and we wouldn't be able to come in at all, so we wanted to sort of have that flexibility up our sleeves. So we started using he had a setup and like an audio interface at home, and we supplied him with a mic, and when just that plugged into his computer, we used Clean Feed to get that back to the studio. So that software, cloud software enabled us to very quickly, with very low latency, be able to have him coming back into the studio, and with mix minus feed and everything, so that it was pretty much like he was in the room because there was very low latency, so low delay.
Good enough quality that people weren't really aware of the difference?
Yeah, I mean, look, occasionally there were some glitches, and but it's a cloud service that's based in the UK, so so it was traversing probably a bit, but like 90% of or 95% of the time, it just worked. And so I don't know that other people have had issues with it, but we didn't really have many issues with it at all. And yeah, it was pretty rock solid that we were using it constantly, like Monday to Friday for at least 3 months.
And you're talking about a couple of 100 milliseconds rather than many seconds.
Yeah. It was 200 milliseconds at the most.
Yeah.
We've had a question come in from Mick Kerr regarding full remote broadcasting. How are people dealing with phone-in segments?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Okay, so your team is riffing away from their home studios, all being put together, and now you want to bring in the phones. So how have you been managing that?
Oh, I can have a crack at that, but fundamental to understanding how that works is understanding that Skype is our codec. And so our approach was perhaps a little unorthodox, but since we have 90 volunteer broadcasters, it was very clear that we needed a solution that didn't require a lot of retraining and didn't require sending hardware out to 90 different households. And we experimented with Zoom, and Zoom has some extreme limitations in a broadcasting context. Not the least, the length of a meeting for free. And Skype uses Opus as its audio codec. It's a peer-to-peer arrangement, and we're finding definitely sub 50 millisecond latency. Our breakfast presenters, one's on the Morning Peninsula in Melbourne, one's down on East Gippsland, and the other one's in Coburg. None of them are in the studio. And so having set up the infrastructure to allow that to work, then dialing a guest into a Skype session, which is what happens for 6 or 7 of our breakfast segments every morning. And in the room I'm talking to you from tonight, there is a man doing a Skype interview to air on a computer that's an arm's length away. So that kind of just all fell into place. But the primary reason we chose Skype was because pretty much everyone knew how to use it already. And bending it to our will proved to be far simpler than using Zoom to do the same thing.
What has it done in terms of presentation technique? Because if you under normal circumstances, you'd dial somebody up, you put them on hold, you'd have them sitting on a channel, you'd say, "Oh, hello," and our next caller, and you push the channel open, and it'd be all very smooth. How has that translated into using Skype as your phone patch?
Not vastly different, in that the team talking between the presenters and the guest, so the initial engagement, the setup for the on-air segment, and the departure is all done with the channel muted. Perhaps that would be clearer if everyone understood that our broadcasters have access to a remote console, and what we laughingly refer to as the talent lounge, which is the collection of people collaborating on Skype, is one fader on the desk. There is a music or 2 or 3 music channels, sponsorship, that kind of stuff. And we've got a fallback system that allows you to bleed some of that back into the talent lounge so that people are always aware, or to the extent that the panel operator wants them to be aware, that they're running a radio program. And so, yes, it is different, but we found that people have adapted to it very quickly. And the interviews that we do in studio are often mediated by Skype. So I'm not saying we've got telephone interfaces, we use telephones in the studios, but many people prefer the fact that there's vision associated with Skype, and it's just as easy to dial someone's phone number from within Skype as it is to do it with the telephone interface. So
So you've got,
Some,
got the
somewhat
option of bringing the the audio in from a PC or whatever. You can have video or not have video within the studio, so you can see the people you're talking to.
correct.
Yeah.
So to some extent, existing practice informed the way that we approached our remote broadcasting. The primary aim is to, one thing we learned is that a lot of our training has been face-to-face, and so converting training materials so that they're consumable online was an initial challenge, but we converted all of the key training material necessary to sustain remote broadcasting into YouTube videos and screencasts.
Okay, Richard, you would have, in your time at 2UE, if not more recently, been presiding over lots of outside broadcasts and lots of multiple phone conversations and patches at a very complex level. Do you have any thoughts you'd want to throw into the discussion about the way we used to do it, the way we do it now?
Well, the way we used to do it was, I remember doing a broadcast in Brisbane when we first started using satellite. And, we all discovered that we needed a thing called mix minus. Mark Day was the presenter in Brisbane at the time, and it was just, and so then we had to, once we got back to Sydney, then we had to figure out how to create a mix minus off the old CSE1 style consoles. And so it was a revolution. But look, these days, I mean, if I can quote the experience at 2SER, for instance, a lot of the presenters there during the pandemic have learnt that their home studio, where they can look out in the backyard and record the same program that they would have to travel into the city with all their CDs and sit down and present for 2 hours, is much nicer to do that. They're also able to download via an FTP site the sponsorship so they could insert the sponsorship and the IDs into their program, all under their control, and time the thing to exactly 1 hour and 59 minutes. And then move that whole program back to the studio, where it then went onto the playout system next year and was programmed into that. And so 2SER themselves have mainly been running on empty studios. I mean, so much of it has been remote access. Breakfast has been live, but so much has been pre-records, which is really what a lot of the programming was anyway. So the only programs, breakfast and Drive and the Daily, which is the morning show, which have been using phones, and they've used the separation between rooms or between remote studio as well to maintain their separation. So that way we've been able to maintain the phone thing.
Stephen, you've spent quite a bit of time moving people out of the premises at Hope, and you'll be talking about some of that work at the Cbla conference. So how have you, what have you done in order to enable people who are collaborating from multiple locations to also bring in additional relays, phone patches, whatever, and have it seamless to the listeners?
Yeah, well, a lot of the collaboration that they've been using had actually been using Teams before we fully implemented it for the visual cues, like Cameron was saying with Skype. They also have been using, so say of our breakfast duo, they're both at home, like after their shift, they're both at home and wanting to pre-record an interview with somebody for the next day. What they'll would either use Teams or clean feed to that guest to do the interview, and they're both in different locations and both being able to hear the caller without any mix minus issues. They can even we've supplied a few people with the Procaster Rodecaster Pros, the little desks, which have a great little Bluetooth hybrid in them, and so they're able to call guests on their mobile phones and interview them that way. So a lot of it has been that sort of pre-recording. As far as a live situation, there's always been at least one person in the studio, if you like, as the co-host or on-air panel operator. But the remote people have access to the phone system to be able to see the phone system and take calls.
So you would actually just put the phone call to air in the studio, and everybody who is remote would be hearing it, hearing in their cans exactly as if they were sitting on the other side of the console.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
We've got a question from Kevin Wallace now, which
yeah,
is...
I was just going to move to that. Thank you, Hannah. Actually, I was just going to say to everybody, you're putting questions into the chat, which is not the best place to do it because we can manage questions for this much better if you put it into the Q&A. So yeah, let's change the topic completely, and we'll go to a bit of an RF one. So I'll read Kevin's question. He says, at the end of July, we changed frequency. The month of transmission testing went well. Yes, doesn't the test always go well? And in the last week or two, we've had a couple of listeners who've contacted us and said, our volume is lower than other radio stations and what we were before the transition, before changing frequency. They're located within 5 kilometres of the transmitter antenna. To my knowledge, we haven't changed anything. I'm not sure why, but I'm also a non-tech person. Any ideas and solution? The first question I would ask is, when you change frequencies, did you change frequencies on the same exciter? But let's assume that they didn't. Well, you know, what would we be advising Kevin and Kevin's team to go and have a look at?
I think it's a... do they have a redundant chain? Is it a totally separate chain, the new thing, in which case it's probably most likely, and is it being fed by composite? If it's being fed from composite, is the composite running at the same level into the old transmission, into the old transmitter as to the new transmitter with the changed frequency?
So the first question is, was everything lined up the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what does the module at minimum? What does the modulation level on the front of the transmitter say?
Yeah, it's definitely a modulation problem. I mean, it's, you know, if they're 5 kilometres away from the antenna.
Raises a very interesting question. How many stations have a receiver at the transmitter or at the studio that they can use to confirm that their off-air level is in fact correct? So something that's actually got meters on it. And yes, I'm sure you do, Cameron. And Stephen, I'd be pretty sure that you would somewhere. And indeed, I have at home a receiver with meters on it because every so often I'll be looking after a station or they'll be asking for a comparison. So it's pretty easy to put some sort of metering on the output of a tuner. It's probably easier to do that than it is to find a tuner to put metering on the output of these days.
If Tim Borges was here, he would be offering us one of those USB dongles that do DC to daylight and allow you to capture that stuff so that you could look at your station's modulation radiation profiles over time. And it would behoove you then to take a snapshot before you change frequencies so that you can be certain that having changed, that the audio that the carrier was delivering was much the same as when you started.
Kevin's saying that everything stayed
the same, which it sounds very, very strange to me, because I would not have expected a station to cold turkey switch frequencies on the same transmitter. So go off air on one transmitter and onto another one. I would have thought they'd be different devices, and if they're different devices, there's always the potential for them to be set up differently. Yeah, be aligned differently. Yes. Probably the advice that I would give, and you know, this is not an absolute measurement technique, but it stood me in good stead many times, is to have a tuner with a couple of stations stored in it and cruise around the band and compare the station I'm interested in with what I'm seeing from other stations. So go to a couple of the, you know, the heavy rock doofa stations, the local commercial stations, look at the ABC and compare the level indication on your station with what everybody else is doing. If it's substantially higher or lower, go and tweak it, and if it's just a little bit different, then maybe you're okay, and it's your listeners who have the challenge, not your station.
I've got a left of field idea. Please don't all laugh. In fact, no, we're in community broadcasting. No one will actually laugh. It seems to me that the off-air monitoring at the station end must have been altered to tune the station into the new frequency. And perhaps in doing so there, the reticulated audio to the studio has gone up in level. And I have many broadcasters who broadcast by ear, not by eye, and pay no attention to the metering in front of them. So...
Although I will say, Kevin did point out that it's listeners who have raised the question.
No, John, you misunderstood. So the broadcaster is sending less bergs up the stick because the in-station monitoring is louder.
Oh, I see. Ooh. Oh, and then we get into the very interesting topic of audio processors and how much control do you have, and what knobs can you turn, and can you even listen to your own off-air signal? Which is certainly a major challenge. I know, Cameron, you're on FM, but you probably have a digital link. I mean, are your people listening to your own off-air signal, or are they listening to what's coming out of the studio?
Yeah, you go to a very, very interesting point. Those people who've been in the industry a long time know that off-air return signals had negligible delay, and presenters used off-air return as confidence that their audience were hearing their mellifluous tones as best they could.
Absolutely.
And as we've introduced digital linking into our FM chains, or even diverged and started broadcasting our audio across the internet, and those of us who are lucky enough to be broadcasting on DAB+, have introduced multi-second delays into our transmission chains. I think DAB+ in Melbourne currently sits at 8.3 seconds. So,
a bit difficult to listen to yourself.
Yeah, and so there's an argument that says, well, let's dispense with this off-air monitoring nonsense. We retain it so that not as a primary source of monitoring. Obviously, you can't talk to air with an 8.5 second delay, or not in any effective way. But we retain it so that if someone calls and say, hey, do you guys sound like shit on DAB+, that the presenter, and when there are no staff at our station, broadcasters engage with our listeners. So before they pull the ripcord and call the people in the triage tree, they can ascertain whether what the listener is reporting is actually a local effect that the listener is experiencing, or a more general failure. And so in that sense, the utility of off-air monitoring within your station has not gone away, but its usefulness as a constant mode of listening.
It's become confidence monitoring.
Yeah. Look, have any of the three of you installed or considered proxy monitoring, so that you are actually listening to what's coming back off the stick, which might have a little bit of delay? In case of a digital link, it might have a couple of 100 milliseconds delay, so you can't listen to it while you're talking. But when you key on the microphone, your monitoring switches to something off another limiter, or with an equivalent processing chain, so that it sounds to the presenter the same as it would. That's an extreme case, but implemented anything like that?
No, absolutely. And I mean, on FM, Optimod processor, for instance, gives you analog out as well as composite out. Most of the limiters do. So we've used the analog output for the confidence monitoring and switched it whenever the microphone is turned on. So that, they're still literally monitoring off air
the processed audio.
Yeah. And it's still processed, which makes it all nice and comfy.
There's an architectural side question there. But, in that instance, then the FM processing is being done at station end.
Yes.
Because otherwise you'd have to return the audio from the transmitter side, doubling the link path.
It's been done at the studio end, yes.
Or maybe the first stage of the processing, so you're listening before the transmitter protection limiter.
The big commercial FM is on 2-day Triple M. They have been doing that for years. Once they put in their Dolby links to their transmitter sites and everything, that's where the first sign of the problems really arose. But I agree with you now, is put all your forms of transmission, your web, your DAB and your FM up on a multi-selector, and that then in turn goes into your off-air monitoring point as a confidence monitoring position.
Kevin's elaborated on his station question, saying they're a regional station and the callers are in one specific area. Other towns have no problems in the quality.
Well, that's a really interesting one, because there's very little you can do to an FM signal that will change your perception of loudness, provided you're getting enough signal that your radio is relatively happy. The audio level can't change, which is not the same as with AM, but your perception of the audio level is pretty much a given once you've got an FM signal out there. So I can't imagine what you could possibly do that would be, related to transmission that would give different people in different locations different audio levels.
Here's an idea. Again, Cam comes up with the wacky ideas.
No, that's why you're in the job you're in.
I am aware that some regional broadcasters use their primary off-air transmission as the relay to other sites. And so they have a tuner that can hear what's emanating from the transmitter that's co-located with their studio, and then they rebroadcast that. And if pure speculation there, but if that was a mechanism that was in the chain, then so maybe in the alteration of the relay after the change of frequency, something was done to attenuate the audio.
There's another good thought. Lots of interesting thoughts there. Barry Barwick made a comment saying the audio is low. It could be that there's no stereo, but of course, unless you've got an out of phase situation, the level between stereo and mono version of the same signal will probably be, the loudness will be pretty similar.
You did say the out of phase word, John.
I did. Yeah,
new transmitter, new cable harness.
Ooh, well, of course, if you had any sort of out of real channel reversal, out of phase signal, then people who are listening in stereo would hear something that was maybe a bit weird, but the similar level. People who are listening in mono most likely wouldn't hear any announcer at all. It'd be cancelled out. I don't know, Stephen, you got any thoughts?
No, that was phasing was one of my thoughts. But yeah, if it's in different towns, it could be that if they're using translators, well then
we kind of need some more information on the setup of the thing.
Kevin, I think the chumps are suggesting the best thing to do is go and get a radio, put a meter on the output of it, go and check that your level is the same as the other stations around you, and then see if you can find a listener who says it's low level. Take the radio out there without adjusting anything and see what it says when you get there. So that's always a good test. I would. So we've been going for a bit over an hour. There is a topic that I did want to cover because it's quick, useful, and will lead to some other discussions. And Cameron mentioned when I was talking to him last night, he'd been doing some work analysing the performance of all things, small USB dongles. So you get these little dongles that have an input and an output, or maybe for a headset as well, and a USB on the other side. So this is your external audio interface. Cameron, why did you do the analysis, and what did you find?
Well, there were two drivers. The pandemic became the major one. So kitting up broadcasters who didn't have home studios to be able to live present remotely. We all assume that our computers have got some jacks on the outside of them that you stick audio connectors into. Well, in 2020, I'm sorry to say that that's not actually true. People make computers. Shock, horror. People actually make computers today without audio interconnects. And so to circle back around to what I was saying about training material before and allowing people to feel supported, it was important to us that we came up with a kit that we could deliver to someone's home with a video that they could plug in and that would work. And that if we had to support them after the event, that it was the same kit that everyone else had. And so in a sense, it was trying to level the playing field. And so every computer today that we might contemplate broadcasting with has got a USB interface.
Mm-hmm.
So that opened the can of worms about how much money do you need to spend on a quality USB interface. And I didn't know this at the start of the year, but pretty much every USB interface you can buy under $150 has got the same chipset inside it.
So they should all sound the same?
Well, at the electronics level, people do or don't do things that make them sound great, and the power supplies the computers delivered to the USB interface can have an impact, and some vendors provide operating system specific drivers that enable or disable various functions. The Cmedia device that I'm talking about is absolutely extraordinary. It's been around for about 12 years. It's got built-in sine tone on the analog side. It can do mono or stereo input, mono or stereo output.
So there we go. There is an example of the Cmedia chipset. You can go online and find this as made in Taiwan, and there's its block diagram, and you can see that it has USB inputs, and it has audio outputs, and it has audio inputs. There you go. And so that's built into various devices, and sometimes works and sometimes doesn't.
Well, invariably it works, but whether it provides audio that's useful for your intended purpose, be that a podcast or pre-recording a phone interview or broadcasting live, that's a pretty variable piece. So you can buy these things for about $2.50 on eBay.
The chips, you're talking about the chips or the devices?
No, the assembled devices.
Oh, okay. Let's have a look at a couple, because I'm just going to my favorite go-to strange Chinese website. This is Banggood out of Hong Kong, so I use them, and you could also use AliExpress. You'd find much the same stuff. So here's an example of some of these dongles that you were talking about.
The $8.64 there, one to the right of your cursor, John.
This one here
is one that I've got several of back at the station.
Right.
It's shite. Don't worry about it.
That would be this one. Oh, shite. Is that's the technical term? Okay. So for $8.64.
So you need
is it shiter than the $5.75 translucent package?
I can't speak with any authority about those because we didn't actually test them, but the one you showed us earlier was one that I've actually bought a few of. The good thing about them is that the barrier to entry is negligible.
Yeah.
But for those of us who use RME interfaces, for example, then you're looking at spending multiple hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for a USB interface. You can't go out and buy 10 of them to compare the different brands to see whether... whereas these things, it's actually relatively easy, and in a click and pay kind of environment, getting them delivered via the eBay, which is kind of our go-to place. But we were finding we were getting them through the post, and that's the thing, not big. Well, 5 of those in a bag costs next to nothing.
Have a look at a couple more of these, because I found so there's a really interesting one here, and these ones always have wonderful pictures on them. So here's a device that plugs in. It's got 2 USB sockets on it. It's got 2 pairs of two headphone outputs and a microphone input. There you go. You can see that. So that's $17, which is a little bit more expensive. But you think that's probably got the same chipset and might well perform exactly the same?
Possibly. The fact that it's got a USB socket on it tells me that probably not. None of the designs I've seen have got USB hubs built into them. The CM108 does all of the USB 2 audio protocols, and significantly will work out of the box with every operating system on the planet. Perhaps not Windows 95 of those of you who are still running Windows 95. But any contemporary operating system, Apple, Linux, or Windows of the last 10 years, these things just plug in and the operating system recognizes them. Interesting thing here is that Apple, the current version of macOS, emasculates the device's capability for doing side tone, which is really, really irritating. Windows Windows 7, Windows 10 do a superlative job of providing access to all of the features of the chipset. For whatever reason,
And Apple hides it.
well, they don't hide it. No, they don't offer you any control. So they drive it to the midpoint of its range and leave it there.
Okay.
Whereas Windows gives you a slider control on the sound interface that allows you to vary the side tone you get. Now, the side tone here is analog side tone. It stays on the microphone side of the interface, so it's zero latency. And so the quality of the amplifiers for the side tone is a differentiating feature. John, perhaps just because everyone's probably nodding off by now, leap forward to the...
Just wanted to go through this because I put up some of these for Cameron before, and like I saw this one, which is really cute. This one here, which has, as you can see, it's got a headphone output, a microphone input, and it's got a socket in the middle, which allows you to connect, a headset that has a four-way 3.5mm connector. Interestingly, noticing that this one breaks the standard where the microphone is green and the headphones are pink. But you said that there's this one that looks like that and another one that looks like this, almost look identical, but performed differently in your testing.
Yes, and my suspicion is that the one we're looking at now actually has the C-Media chipset in it, and the other one has a knockoff. So what we discovered was that there are several chipsets floating around that are pin compatible with the C-Media device, but don't offer the full suite of functionality.
Right.
And the people who are buying bucket loads of them so that they can make 25,000 devices don't actually care. And so if there's a moral to this story, it's buyer beware.
Yeah.
Often getting out the spudger and prizing apart the enclosure is not going to reveal much because the real estate inside the enclosures is usually so tight that there's either a daub of hot glue sitting on top of the chip, or people have in fact encased the chip and its supporting circuitry in epoxy so that they can't be easily reverse engineered. And you might go, well, hang on, it's a chipset. Why would you be wanting to reverse engineer it? It seems to us from our analysis of perhaps a dozen or more of these things that it's really about the supporting circuitry as well as the chipset. So driving the noise floor down, having full stereo on the inputs and outputs with a good power supply. These things sound pretty good. Right. Perhaps not as $1,000 RME USB interface, but I think I was saying to you before we came on, John, that the sweet spot so far to us looks to be about 55 Australian dollars.
Right,
and maybe you could do the big
this
reveal.
one here. So this is available from Manny's. So we have no connection with any of these people. We're just telling you where you can go and get stuff. So that one in the middle, and it just happens to be red and standing out. It wasn't designed like this on their website, but maybe they want to draw your attention to it. So that's the $55 interface.
It's actually quite awesome. Snap the case apart with the spudger, and just behind the USB pigtails strain relief there are solder pads.
Just behind here, yeah. Yep.
And so we're recasing, for one of our applications, we're recasing these things. So being able to desolder the USB interface, bring our own power supply on board, that kind of stuff. Those four RCA sockets. So this is quite unusual in the way these things are packaged. Most of them use 3.5mm TRRS or TRS sockets. And those of you who use those things in the field know that the lever arc of a TRS socket is of the plug is sufficient usually to mechanically desolder the socket from the board. RCA connectors are more resistant to that kind of stuff. obviously, I said this to the guys earlier that these things are not balanced, and so there's potentially a noise factor there that you need to control for if you're going to use them in a studio environment. But we found for our out in the field use, they're just fine.
Yeah,
and they just work.
I think there's definitely a topic there for the future for a Technorama discussion, but that one's pretty easy to grapple with, and of course your audio is going to be as good as the interface. So if your interface starts off being bad, your audio is not going to improve when you're recording whatever it is you're using the interface for.
One thing we've noticed is that a lot of particularly Windows laptops that are designed as a part of a business fleet, have particularly shit onboard audio, and so
that's a technical term there, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah.
And it's a relatively inexpensive way that you can take a contemporary Lenovo off-the-shelf X-Fleet laptop and get decent audio out of it.
Yeah. So, all right, there's a tip from this. Let's see. There was a comment from Steve Byrne about USB devices. You know, there must be some onboard audio cards that are pretty good, but you'd have to assume that whatever vendors were doing, the onboard audio wasn't the high piece of focus. If they've got SPDIF connectors, you could probably rely on that.
Yeah, but the problem with a laptop is that you've got other RF and hash generators in close proximity to your audio, and you know it doesn't require much analysis to see that the noise floor coming out an otherwise silent audio output is actually pretty loud. And particularly these devices with pigtails means that you can actually put them on a desk so that they're conveniently located for operation point of view, from an operation point of view. But you've put sufficient distance between the audio interface and all of the other hashy stuff that's inside the laptop chassis. Some of this sounds a bit like snake oil. I'm not trying to sell anyone. I'm just saying this has been our real world experience, that that 5-inch pigtail can be enough to silence the audio.
Look, I was just going to throw to Richard, who, you know, Richard and I started, this is where I do show my age, but Richard and I started in the day when typically you were building all your own equipment, or, you know, building a substantial amount of it. Indeed, when I started as a commercial radio announcer, I was in a station that was entirely valves and had been entirely built by the chief engineer. But I don't think any of the rules that Cameron is talking about have really changed since then, have they? It's really attention to detail and not violating laws of physics. Would you agree, Richard?
Oh, absolutely. And the noise that emanates out of PCs is really dreadful stuff. And going for that, just going back onto the back topic there, going to a decent USB interface. I mean, JCar actually sell a pretty good one as well. It's about $59, I think it is. And it's tip ring sleeve. I think it's tip ring sleeve.
Yeah.
Tip sleeve coming out of it, and it's really, really robust and it doesn't generate very much noise at all. But if you go into these horrible little USB things that plug in, like the ones you were showing, they're absolutely dreadful things. Shouldn't be allowed. But no, the fundamentals have changed, John. I mean, these days you go and buy something off the net and plug it in and suffer the consequences of it.
Hope that it works.
Hope that it works.
Very, very sad. Look, I will very, very quickly, because I think we should wrap it up. But I did a Banggood purchase run just after I finished the convention, as I realized I needed to start working on some projects, and some of the results were surprising. I'll just show you. It is amazing what you can buy for almost no money if you're not going to build it yourself. This is an interface that you might have for an Arduino. So it has 4 inputs, 4 relays. You'd put loads on here, and they probably claim that you could put 240 volts on that. The relay would take 240 volts. I don't know whether I want to put 240 volts on that. But basically, these opto-isolated inputs here, and there are little the little jumpers, so you can set where you short to earth or put volts in it to make it work either. That I bought that because it was like $7. And for $7 I couldn't make that, and that's useful to have in the kit bag to solve problems. I got one of these. I'll just take this out of the bag. Here's something, and again, this was under $10, which you might find useful in a radio station. I can think of so many ways you could use this. 4 relays again, but this is actually a garage door opener. It goes with these, so you get these little key fobs. You pair this with the device. It's pretty secure. I think it uses a rotating code. You can clear a fob out really easily. You could use these instead of keys for your radio station. So for $10, you use something that's on the inside and really can't be fooled. And on one day you go and rekey the whole place. Everybody's badge gets rekeyed, so people who still have old fobs can be locked out of the system. Very, very, very cute. My favorite tool, by the way, thing called a wow stick. There you go. A little bit more expensive. Comes with this is a tube full of tips. So this is your electronic screwdriver. It recharges on USB. Hang on, where are we? There. And it has a little torch on it so you can see what you're working on. If you're working on a piece of equipment and you've got like 10,000 screws to undo, these are just wonderful, and they last forever between charges. And at some stage in the future, I'll pull out my TS100 soldering iron that has replaced my Weller, but it's a 18-volt soldering iron, temperature controlled, and I run it on an Aldi battery instead of using a pyro pen. So all of this stuff available on the Chinese websites, and sometimes available locally as well, but really cheap stuff. In a time when we're not going to go out and build every item for a radio station, you can still find lots of small assemblies that you can put together creatively to do useful things. So there you go. That was a bit of show and tell. We'll do some more of that in a later session. So look, let's just wrap up here, I think. Have we got any more important questions that we haven't thrown at the chumps? We didn't get as many questions as I thought we would have, Hannah. No.
Indeed, no.
Okay.
I actually have one just before we go. Hopefully it's a very quick one.
Yeah.
If you're a beginner tech, or you're getting stuff together for a beginner tech, what is absolute must-have equipment that you have in your little bag of tricks?
I'll lead. You must have a soldering iron. You must have a set of screwdrivers. You must have side cutters and some needle nose pliers. You absolutely must have a multimeter.
And some solder.
And some solder. Okay.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse than having your soldering iron running. You can't find that piece of solder that you wrapped around the screwdriver.
Isn't that horrible? Oh no, Stephen, what would you put in your?
A touchless wand, so that, for knowing whether something's live or not.
Oh yes, the non-contact detector.
That's
actually. Look, I'll just throw this up because Banggood sends me something every day because I'm a good purchaser. Believe it or not, this came in today's. Here we go. Hang on. There we go. Hang on. Which one am I? My share. Which screen have you got up at the moment?
The Must Tool MT.
Ah, good. Okay. So this came out today, and this is a small multimeter. So it's I think 130 mils up there. It's thick enough to be able to take it runs on 2 AA batteries, but there it is. This has built into it, it's got fixed probes, it's got built into it a temperature sensor, and it's got a non-contact voltage detector. And if I read what it said, that little scale there, as you bring it close to the voltage, tells you how strong the field is. So there's an example of exactly the sort of thing you should have in your toolkit before you go anywhere.
Thank you. Trent Geddes has a question. He's got his hand up. I'm going to allow him to speak if that's okay. Oh, no,
Okay.
he has withdrawn that.
He's withdrawn the question. Okay.
Swiftly withdrew. Never mind.
Wow. I mean, it's getting up to an hour and a half. We're going to have to pull the pin on this pretty soon. Richard, what would you put in the toolkit of the things that you still have to put in a toolkit?
What's interesting, I do the multi-tool thing where you've got one handle thing you can put in the different bits on the end.
Yeah.
A number of times I utilise that. I mean, it does save carrying a lot of different screwdrivers. Something to hit the presenter with.
Good. So a hammer.
We call that a training tool in our checklist.
But isn't that the thing, where it appears on the bill, $100, and when they say, all I saw you do was hit the piece of equipment with a hammer, you say, well, it's, $1 for hitting with a hammer and $99 for knowing where to hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it didn't leave the mark. Yeah.
Yes. Very important not to leave marks on presenters. Cameron, what would you be putting in your toolkit?
Well, I'm completely happy with that. My toolkit has everything mentioned so far. I've stopped using SolderWick, but some desoldering assistant device for those of us who solder infrequently or can't wave that circuit board around in the air fast enough to get the solder off it.
A solder sucker.
A solder sucker, yes. I was wondering how the polite way of saying that was.
No, solder sucker is the term.
You just went straight to the...
It's the official JCAR too.
Yep.
Yeah, solder sucker. Yeah.
If you can have shite audio, I can have solder that sucks.
Yep. So I'd add the solder sucker. And for those of us who work in stations that are largely plumbed with RJ45 patch labels and fly leads, some kind of
a tester,
pair testing device that you can put a thing on one end of a circuit and walk to the other end of the building and find the result.
And then put another thing on that tells you that it's actually wired correctly.
Yes. Exactly. That not just give you continuity. That I, being a fan of toys, as I guess we all are, invested in one earlier in the year that tells me not only all of the conventional stuff, but tells me how far away from where I'm standing that the pair is broken.
Oh, the time domain reflectometer.
Yep.
Oh, the TDR.
The technology that does it is wonderful, but actually knowing that, that'll be over there in that chrome frame.
Yes. And in fact, what I was waving around
that's the only thing that's 2.5 meters away from you.
The thing I was waving around there is, in fact, that was from JCAR. It's a Crone tool, yes, with a interchangeable blade. So we don't get 110 connections anymore in this part of the world, but and you can use it as a nose picking attachment in between times. Good. I think that answers that question. Look, of the questions that we got, I think we have to award the prize, and I'm going to make the captain's call and say I think Kevin deserves the prize for that question about the FM levels. Certainly got us thinking a bit.
I'd say that he officially stumped us, John, because we didn't actually give him an answer that he can take back to the station.
Well, we didn't have enough information either, but it's okay. We'll say that he officially stumped us. That's good. So Kevin, we will work out how to get your Cbla attendance to you. That's the Cbla conference coming up at the end of October. Since we're coming up to the hour and a half point, I will just go back and say if you want to get your cheap entry for friends and members of Technorama, go to the Technorama website right now. You'll find the story there about how to sign up for the Cbla conference, and you'll find the secret magic word there with a link that you just click through, and it will give you the $35 rate. So you'll save $35. And when you consider that it's $15 to attend a single session, paying $35 for four days of conference is a pretty good thing. So strongly recommend that. I'll be there. I imagine everybody else who's on the screen at the moment will be there in one way or another. And Stephen is actually presenting. Stephen, just point to the session that you and Tim and others will be.
And me.
Oh, and Hannah. Okay, so what's it going to be about?
It's about setting up a studio at home for remote broadcasting and recording.
Wow, a topic we never talked about. No.
Really unusual topic, you know.
Yes. I would like to thank everybody who has participated in tonight's Stump the Chumps. We'll be coming back at a time and date sometime in the future. This is really good. We said we'd riff on lots of topics. If you didn't ask the questions, we riffed. And there will be more. Feel free to ask questions on Q&A because that's a good place to bring them up. And we eventually will work out how to republish all the interesting stuff on the Technorama website for the people who don't want to play with Facebook. But for the moment, Facebook is where that piece of the action is. It's a good service. We seem to come up with lots of interesting discussion. And right now, the discussion du jour, because it changes from time to time, is about automation systems. And certainly asking, what automation system is your station using? Go and vote, or add to the collection and vote if it's not one of the ones that we already know about. So there you go. I would like to thank very much my colleagues here for Stump the Chumps. So Richard, Stephen, Cameron, thank you very much for joining us. Hannah, thank you very much for moderating. And I'll throw back to you for the closure. If you're not a member of Technorama already, $10. Join now on the website.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening for Stump the Chumps. I hope that your burning technical questions have been answered, or at least you know where to buy cream for it now. It would be great to have your feedback on this session. After you close the Zoom session, a feedback window will pop up. Let us know if the session was useful to you, if you have any ideas for other Technorama sessions you'd like to see in the future. It's really helpful feedback for us to build infrastructure and things that you want to see and that you want to learn. And yes, thank you, of course, once again to Richard Fleming, Cameron Paine, Stephen Wilkinson, and John Maizels. And thank you all so much for making time this evening. Have a great night, and we will see you next month on the last Tuesday of the month for another rendition of Technorama Tuesdays. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Emma.